Hi everyone, it's Jackie at Spare Room Studio. Just a very quick impromptu video this morning. There's a bit of noise going on in the background. I hope that doesn't make that onto the video. And I'm in my PJs, a bit scruffy. I apologise for that, but I just recently had a medical procedure yesterday and I'm being lazy this morning, so I'll just push those sleeves up. Just being a little bit lazy and a bit slow this morning to get going, but I wanted to have a go with these little watercolour paints that I received from Royal Talens Australia. It's the Van Gogh Pocket Box Pinks and Violets set, and there's 12 pans, and I've just done a really quick little test here with the paints on some watercolour paper that came with the prize, which is Espresso Aqua watercolour paper, 300 GSM, medium texture. So I've just tried the colours out on there, and I'm just going to have a little play. Hubby's taking Hamish for his morning walk for me this morning, and I'm just going to have a little play with the watercolours, just show you a little bit how I might actually work with watercolours themselves rather than Crayola super tips or markers or any sort of watercolour pencils. This is how I used to work when I worked with watercolours. Generally out of a tube. I used to buy the tubes more than the pans because they were, back when I was doing this, the tubes were more available than what the pans were. Plus I've always had to sort of go with what my budget would allow me, because I've spent so much time as a stay-at-home mum and a stay-at-home wife over the years that when I'm not working, I try to keep my hobby costs within, you know, a reasonable budget, because that's just who I am. And so what I would do generally when I was working was I like to wet the paper first. And obviously watercolour paper, you're going to get some really different results than you are with a colouring book, but my preferred style of working was that I would wet the paper first. I would have a little bit of colour mixed up in a palette, and then I would wet or drop the wet brush into the wet paper and let all the colours blend on the paper. I very much have always enjoyed wet in wet techniques. I've never really been one for wet on dry, highly blended watercolours. Obviously everything has its place, but my preferred style, where I could, was to work this way, where I'd wet the paper and then drop the colour into the wet paper. And just to show you on a piece of watercolour paper what that might look like, you get clean water and wet your paper. And I'll try and pick a colour that's going to be a bit more vibrant so that you can see it. And you just drop that into the water and let it bleed. And depending on how diluted you've got your paint, so that was straight off of the palette. Sorry, straight out of the pan, whereas this is diluted onto the palette and a little bit less vibrant. And then you can drop clean water into the pigment Let's try that again up here with maybe a darker colour that you might see better. Now I'm sorry if I and ah a little bit. I have just had a medical procedure yesterday, and I didn't realise I was going to be actually totally knocked out, and I was, so I could be experiencing a little bit of a delay due to the anaesthetic. So the brain and the mouth aren't working that great. So that's the sort of thing that I would do on watercolour paper. So I'll let that dry and I'll show that to you later. Now this is the little brush that came in the palette. It's one for sort of travelling with, and it comes apart for easy storage, but I'm finding it's coming apart quite easy, so I'm going to put that aside, and I'm just going to use one of my brushes that I already had. So where I've done that hair there, what I might choose to do then would be get a deeper colour and put some of the deeper colour in. And it's a constant process of re-wetting the brush, picking up colour, wiping off colour. It's difficult to give you like a precise description of how I would do it, but it comes over time. The more that you paint, the more that you colour, the more that you draw or whatever, the more you do it, the more you get to know what your materials are actually capable of doing. And it's not something that really can be told to you in precise detail. It's something you need to pick up and learn through your own working, your own experiments, your own playing. It's really, you know, you can tell somebody the basics, you know, of one colour mixing and sort of things like that, but when you want to start getting a little bit more experimental, it truly only comes from playing with your supplies, your materials and so on, to see what they're capable of doing and, you know, what you're capable of doing with those things. And it's trial and error, and there are going to be some ugly pages, and there's going to be some not so desirable results and so on. This is, you know, basically the first time I'm using these paints. I have no idea how they're going to react. I have no idea if they're going to behave in the same manner as other watercolours that I've used before. And I can't know that until I play with it and potentially make mistakes, you know, create some ugly work. That is the only way I'm going to know exactly what these paints are capable of doing, or what I'm capable of creating with those paints. So I hope that, you know, I hope that makes some sense, because I'm just trying to work out from my swatch what colour I might want next. I might just go with what I've already got there. Processes like painting have so many variables to them, and the variables are, you know, us ourselves as humans, our understanding of instructions, the way we interpret things and so on, are all going to have very different results. And the very nature of the paint and the product, there are so many variables about how that can be used. And, you know, there's other things that come into it, like we've talked about it many times that the quality of the paper, you know, this paper is going to react extremely poorly compared to a high quality watercolour paper or even a low quality watercolour paper. Everything's going to have its variable. And so when I sit here to do a demonstration for you, I don't know exactly what's going to happen. You know, I can have a fair idea what I think is going to happen, but the opportunity for so much more or different to happen is there every time. So, you know, please watch demonstrations for watercolour and different types of painting. Try and look at it from a technique standpoint or point of view, as techniques that you can have a go at trying, knowing that you are more than likely going to get quite a different result to the person who's demonstrating it to you. So obviously with watercolours we have the opportunity to mix colours and make new colours a little bit better than we do with some other things like the water-based markers. You know, we can do that to a certain extent, but we're limited by the quality of the ink. A watercolour paint and a good watercolour paint obviously has got very different pigment, and so you can get much better results with watercolour pigments and paints. And I'm just going to do a bit of everything here. This is really just to sort of show you that my technique for painting with watercolours, the actual watercolour paints, is still very, very similar to what I would do with the Crayola Super Tips, with watercolour pencils, with Inktense pencils. It's just that instead of picking up from a pencil and taking from the tip or scribbling a marker on a plate, I've mixed a little bit of paint in some pellets here and I'm picking it up with the brush. But it's, you know, the actual technique is very similar, but I'm going to get some different results because the quality of the pigment and the paints is going to be very different to what's in a cheap set of Crayola Super Tips or student grade water-based markers. So at this point they're looking really quite nice, the colours. I'll have to see how it dries. I did do this one a couple of days ago now and it has dried really nicely. I've got a lot of bleeding going on here that is not really very pretty, so I'll just keep encouraging the paint to go in areas where I want it to go. And it's very easy to muddy your colours when you're playing with watercolour paints and mixing lots of colours. You can actually make a really dirty, muddy colour very easy. So it's best to take it in lighter amounts, I guess, lighter washes, and slowly until you're more familiar with what you're doing. So just a very quick little life update. I had a medical procedure yesterday. I'm not really going to talk about what exactly that procedure was. It was a test procedure. I've got 2 weeks trial now before we decide whether I go on to further. I don't want to call it surgery because it's not like major surgery, but it's a procedure. And so until I sort of know a little bit more about what's going on, I don't really want to talk about what's happening until I know a little bit more. But suffice to say that if the procedure is a success, if the trial is a success, it will make my life, quality of life, a little bit better, and it will hopefully stop further deterioration of the problem that I've been having. And it's quite personal, but if it works and the procedure works and I feel like it might be of value to discuss with you what it is, I'll talk about it later. It's not a conditional problem that generally I've heard very many people, certainly not in my life anyway, have experienced or know much about. So if it does work for me, I will talk about it because it might be helpful to someone who's in a similar situation to me and hasn't actually got anybody to talk to about it. So I know that sounds a bit mysterious, but it's not life-threatening stuff. We're not talking about life-threatening stuff. It's just something that impacts your life, but negatively. But certainly is not going to kill me. But sometimes these little annoying problems and conditions pardon me, can impact your life negatively in a way that can make life more difficult and harder than it needs to be. And if there's a solution for it, then we should sort of try it and go for it. And if it improves things, it is all worth it. So we'll see how things go. And as I say, if I feel like what I've experienced might help someone, I'll talk about that further. But at this point in time, I'm not really suffering any pain. I've got some discomfort, obviously. Any sort of invasive procedures to your body, will have some sort of repercussions, but I'm not in a lot of pain. It is a little bit uncomfortable sitting, so I won't be sitting here for a long period of time. I'm just going to add a little bit of that into here as well now. But I just wanted to get this done and unwind a little bit because short periods of doing something that you enjoy can be enough sometimes just to take your mind off of other things. And I know that there are a lot of people in the colouring world who suffer chronic pain, and I know that you will understand exactly what I'm talking about, that sometimes obviously doesn't make the pain go away, but your colouring can sometimes distract you enough that your brain gets a little bit of a break from thinking about it and dealing with it all. It's a little bit of escapism. So this is quite a limited colour palette with the 12 pinks and violets. So I'm not going to be able to really mix a true skin colour. So what I'm going to do is just sort of put a little bit of very pale very diluted pink on here for starters, and then I will probably come back with some coloured pencils and have a further play with this. But sometimes you just need the slightest hint of colour diluted to give your paper a bit of a tone. And then, of course, this book is Wildflower Folk by Christine Karen. I don't think I mentioned that at the beginning, but this book has quite a reasonable amount of grayscale. So even that slightest little hint of colour in the wash over her skin with the grayscale is going to give an indication of some shading and form and so on. So, you know, less is more when it comes to doing skin with watercolour. Go for very diluted colours first and then gradually build up. When this is dry, I can come back and put another wash of colour over it. And this is where I would probably most be looking for a smooth graduated blend of colour rather than those big blobby, you know, washes and blooming and all that vibrant stuff that's going on in the background and in the shell there. I wouldn't choose to do that for a portrait unless it's a very stylised portrait. And this one isn't. This is quite realistic, other than her little, you know, pixie-looking mermaid face there. It's drawn quite realistically, and it's got all the grayscale shading and so on. So this really asks for more of a finely blended look to it than, you know, big blobby blooming bleeding techniques. That would just not suit this little delicate mermaid at all. It's fine for the background, it's fine for her tail or her clothes, but not for her skin. So that's how I make those sorts of distinctions. I sort of look at the style of the style of how the artist has drawn it, and that was a little bit deep. So what I do is I just keep cleaning off the brush, and as I'm coming back I'm blending and lifting some of that excess colour back off as well. And then of course you can clean your brush off completely in fresh water and just with clean water lift some of that off. So I let the style of the picture, the style of the artist dictate a little bit as to how I go about colouring a picture. If it's quite a stylised sort of drawing or depiction of something, then obviously you can let go with your imagination and go for more wild colours, more experimental stuff, and it's going to look, you know, sort of acceptable. But there are no real rules in art, of course. This is just my personal views, but when someone's drawn like such a realistic rendering of something, then I feel like they're the pictures where you can go to town with your blending and your details and really working hard at getting something to look like the real thing. So, you know, I'd save that perhaps for her face here and her upper body, and then the rest of it, the fantastical stuff, can bloom out and be more imaginative and, you know, do all the experimental stuff and so on. I'm probably going to listen back to this video and think, what on earth were you rambling about? But okay, so we're coming up for about 25 minutes there. I hope that it has been in frame and in focus for all of that time. So what I'm going to need to do pretty soon is let all of this dry thoroughly. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this chair back in, and the lower back is protesting a little bit. But yeah, I will need to, I might just get myself a smaller brush and make life a bit easier for myself. So I'll let that dry thoroughly, and what I will do then is decide whether I just want to keep layering up the watercolour washes or whether I want to bring in some coloured pencil details, you know, or how I'd like to proceed a little bit further along with this lovely little mermaid here. The page is called Mermaid's Pearl, if anybody has this book. I know a lot of you do have the book. So what I'm doing here is Christine has given an indication of where the body is underneath this sheer fabric. So I'm just making the body parts a little bit darker there and going to leave this floaty, translucent bit here lighter. So generally what I do with watercolour is I go in really loose and washy in all those big areas, and you know, the areas that don't need to be quite so detailed. And then once it's dry and I come back, that's when I start to make the decisions about where am I going to make it more detailed, where am I going to you know, make some decisions about crisp edges, where it needs to be blended, you know, and all that sort of thing. I come back and I add that on top. Because if you work lightly enough on that first pass with your watercolour, you come back in your subsequent layers and you just add more and more colour once you know how deep you want to go and where you need your darks, where you need your highlights preserved and so on. And what I find is that the more layers that you're putting on there though, the less translucent the effect is, the less watercolour like it is. So I try not to do too much. Oh, sorry, I've got all that mess there. Can you see that mess I've just put all on there? Whoops. I don't know where I picked that up from, but anyway. Yeah, the more layers that you put onto something, the heavier it's going to get. You're losing that lovely translucent effect of watercolour, which is the whole reason you're using watercolour. You know, if you want opaque and you want saturated colour, then perhaps think about using acrylic or gouache or gouache, however you like to pronounce that, or your pencils or oil pastels or whatever. You know, if you're going to use watercolour, perhaps try to embrace the best qualities of the watercolour rather than trying to use it like, you know, all your other products. So I think I might leave that there. I'm starting to fiddle a little bit and I'm tired and I'm not concentrating the best now. So that's probably about half an hour's about my limit at the moment for a colouring session. And just move all this out of the way. So what I'm saying about here losing that translucency, I'm starting to get a bit too solid with the colour there, to my mind, to my thinking. So certainly here is, that was very undiluted. I just put the paint straight onto the wet paper. But within the one painting you can work with several different effects. But you can see here on the eye, to me that's how true watercolour looks. It's very translucent. You've got the white of the paper shining through, same here on the skin. But here I'm starting to get too solid. That's not really how I view watercolour traditionally. Here is more like a true watercolour effect, and then, you know, I'm getting heavier again. So that's just my thought process of about how watercolour works and looks. I'm quite enjoying that so far. And of course, it's quite acceptable to use your watercolour as a base and then just colour over the top of it however you like as well. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed that little play. Once again, just a reminder that it's, just get that in focus if I can. It's Royal Talens Van Gogh Pocket Box, sorry. Pinks and violets watercolour. That's what the packaging looks like. It says brilliant paint with high tinting strength. There's some swatches on the back of the packaging there. And I will just show you how those little swatches are going. So you can see there's quite a bit of almost granulation happening with that colour there. And the paper is quite textured, it is a medium texture. So that's the colours. Let's try and get that back in focus. So that's the colours there, and that's what I've done so far. So thank you for watching. Thank you all for your well wishes. I really do appreciate it. As I say, I will explain a little bit more as I go along if I can, if I feel like it's going to be of any use to anyone. And just like to say happy colouring to you all. I hope you're all enjoying your colouring time and trying new things and experimenting and having fun. And I will see you as soon as I can for the next one. Bye now.